So I called Khalil. I said, Khalil, I feel badly. I'm not sure what to do. We've got your plants, but we can't. There are no flights between here and Jordan. He said, no problem. Call me back in 24 hours. So I called him, went to sleep that night wondering what rabbit he was going to pull out of the hat. Called him the next day and he says, yeah, have the broker take the plants to such and such tarmac at LAX. So I called the broker and the broker hemmed and hawed and pushed back. And he said, all right, we'll run them out there, but don't be ridiculous. There's nothing flying. We'll take them out, put them back in the cooler and send you a bill. A couple hours went by and I heard from the broker. The broker said, so who is this Khalil? I said, yeah, he's my friend. He's a grower in Jordan. They said, no, he's not just a grower. I said, yeah, sure. He's a strawberry grower. I've been to his farm. I said, why do you ask? They said, well, we took the plants out to the tarmac as you suggested, and there sat a Royal Air Jordanian 747 waiting for nothing but his plants. So that's interesting. So I called Khalil. I said, Khalil, how'd you pull that off? He said, oh, very simple. He said, I called the king. I said, King, if you want strawberries, you have to go get your own plants.
That was Steve Nelson, the president and CEO of Plant Sciences. And I'm here today in Watsonville in his office trying to recreate kind of a magic that was created a few weeks ago. I'd come in here for a meeting with Steve, and his stories about his personal leadership, his stories about his Richard and who founded Plant Sciences, and going from a founder culture to a culture where you promote entrepreneurship, where people are excited to come, and it's a startup kind of a culture. How do you do that? And even one of the stories that Steve was telling us was about the power of relationship. Even saying this today, it makes me a little emotional, and I can see that I can feel it, that I'm getting a little bit warm and emotional because I was so inspired, Steve, that day. I actually was on a high. And when I was flying back home and I was thinking about this, and I said, this is ag. This is something that people don't know. So what I wanted to, from that day when I heard you speak, and I said, this needs to be heard. We need to create something. We need to create a forum where some of these stories are told. And so that was the birth of our podcast, This is Ag. So the inspiration comes from Steve Nelson and his stories. And I'm so excited that he is our first guest on our first podcast. So Steve, let's create that magic again today.
I look forward to that.
This is Ag, a show about fascinating and inspiring stories of leaders in agriculture that challenge us to think and introspect on how we lead our organizations. And this is your host, Kirti Butatkar, CEO and President of United Ag.
I had a call back in 2000 from our master license propagator in Spain, and they said, hey, Steve, we've identified a concern. We sent plants of one of your proprietary varieties to Jordan, to a grower in Jordan, where there are no plant breeders' rights and no protection for the variety. So they were concerned, and my first question was, well, how do you know you sent the plants? And they said, well, the grower called us and advised us that he planted them and that he has some experience screening varieties. So if we would issue him a testing license, he would test the varieties and provide us some feedback on the performance of the varieties. So, well, he sounds like an honest guy. Let's issue him the testing license and see how he does. So we stayed in contact through our Spanish propagator. And as the season came to a close, they said, hey, the grower would like to meet with you and share with you his experiences. Turns out the grower's name was Khalil Abu Ghanem. Khalil is actually a displaced Palestinian, having grown up on the Mount of Olives. He was studying agriculture in Egypt in 1967 when the Six-Day War broke out and was not allowed to return to Israel. So he's made residence in Jordan. I met with him at some strawberry meetings in Spain, and Khalil said, oh, Steve, I like very much this variety 633. He had 100 plants of them to test. And he says, but I have a question. Why 633? Sounds like a highway. He says, do you have a name for the variety? I said, Khalil, we do have a name. In the States, we don't use names, but in other parts of the world, they require naming. So the name of the variety was Honor.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And Khalil sort of sat back in his chair and he said, "Oh, I like honors very much. I like to order 1 million honors for this season." So he was going from 100 plants to 1 million, which rarely is such an increase ever even considered. Normally you'd go from 100 plants to 1,000 to 100,000, et cetera. And I said, "Khalil, that's gratifying. However, we still don't have plant breeders' rights here in Jordan, so I'm not sure how we'll do that." He said, "No problem. I'll pay you to propagate the plants in California. I'll go to work on securing plant breeders' rights. And if I succeed, send me the plants. If not, you can keep my money and the plants." I thought, oh, that's a better deal than I get at home. Khalil did, in fact, confirm an order for 1 million plants of honor. We planted mother plants in the nursery in the spring of 2001, and he went to work on securing plant breeders' rights for the variety in Jordan. The summer went by, harvest drew close. In September of 2001, I remember my dad said, "Do we have a plant breeders' rights? Do we have protection for the variety?" I said, "I don't know, I'll call Khalil." I said, "Khalil, how are you coming on plant breeders' rights?" He said, "I should have it here in the next day or two." And sure enough, he called and he said, "I've secured it." I said, "Well, send it to our patent attorney." Happened to be a gentleman in Washington, D.C., and he was skeptical. But he looked at the patent, he called me, he said, "Well, congratulations. Not only is this the first strawberry plant patent in Jordan, it's the first plant patent in Jordan." So Khalil went to work and secured the first plant patent for our honor variety in Jordan. You might recall what occurred September 11th, 2001. Of course, all of us would recall what occurred at that time, and it disrupted the movement of goods between here and the Middle East in a dramatic fashion. So we had his plants, had 1 million plants, about a semi-load of plants. We had his money. He had secured plant breeders' rights, but there were no flights going to the Middle East at the time. We couldn't secure transport of his plants. So I called Khalil. I said, "Khalil, I feel badly. I'm not sure what to do. We've got your plants, but we can't. There are no flights between here and Jordan." He said, "No problem. Call me back in 24 hours. So I called him, went to sleep that night wondering what rabbit he was going to pull out of the hat. Called him the next day and he says, "Yeah, have the broker take the plants to such and such tarmac at LAX." So I called the broker and the broker hemmed and hawed and pushed back. And he said, "All right, we'll run them out there, but don't be ridiculous. There's nothing flying. We'll take them out, put them back in the cooler and send you a bill." A couple hours went by and I heard from the broker. The broker said, "So who is this Khalil?" I said, "Yeah, he's my friend. He's a grower in Jordan." They said, "No, he's not just a grower." I said, "Yeah, sure. He's a strawberry grower. I've been to his farm." I said, "Why do you ask?" They said, "Well, we took the plants out to the tarmac as you suggested, and there sat a Royal Air Jordanian 747 waiting for nothing but his plants." So that's interesting. So I called Khalil. I said, "Khalil, how'd you pull that off?" He said, "Oh, very simple." He said, "I called the king. I said, 'King, if you want strawberries, you have to go get your own plants.'"
That's a great story.
I think when I think of agriculture, I think that's one of the things that is most attractive. People in agriculture are close to the soil, so they understand the sowing and reaping principle. They sow seeds every day. They nurture those seeds. They cultivate those seeds, all the while believing for the increase. And because they live there, I think they esteem friendships and relationships and engagements with a high degree of consideration. Because I think what we learn in agriculture is don't burn bridges. Life's short. Even difficult people can prove helpful down the road. And so I think it's one of the maybe unique factors of agriculture.
What you said is so true, because if you burn bridges or do what you not have that from the soil up relationship, in the long run, that does not help, right? So I usually people get into numbers and people get into this doesn't make sense from a short-term benefit. And I always say that you're playing a very short game by that. Spend your time on building relationships, right? Because that's your long game. Pay the long game. Even financially, you pay a longer game when you build relationship. So that's an amazing story. But doesn't that story kind of connect back to what happened with your dad and at Stanford? You want to tell us that story? That's an interesting story in itself.
Yes, there's more to the story. So that was in 2001, and Khalil and his son Allah have been farming our varieties in Jordan, even propagating our varieties and representing them to growers throughout Dubai and other parts of the Middle East. And some years later, my father was having issues with his heart. AFib issues. The insurance people will understand that. And he ended up at Stanford for some testing, and discovered in that test that he was not only a candidate, but in need of some rather urgent stent placement. I remember getting the call from my mom that Dad was going to go into surgery that afternoon. So I drove up from Watsonville to Stanford Hospital, and I found my dad being transported on a gurney down the hall. Stanford's kind of a fun place to visit. It's a teaching hospital for those who haven't been there. So there they are, rolling Dad down the hallway amongst this crowd. And the doctors were explaining to me that one was the plumber and the other was the electrician, and that they were going to work together to take care of his heart, get the stents placed. The one doctor who hadn't said anything, he said, "Yeah, I'm the electrician. I'll be watching the heart and monitoring its performance." When he spoke, I recognized his dialect immediately, and I looked at him. I said, "Are you from Jordan?" He stopped the gurney. My dad kind of shook there on the journey, and he says, "How did you know I'm from Jordan?" I said, "Well, you sound just like my friend." He said, "Who's your friend?" I said, "My friend is Khalil Abu Ghanem." He smiled. He says, "Unbelievable." He said, "Khalil Abu Ghanem, the strawberry grower?" I said, "Yes." He said, "He's my uncle's best friend." And his uncle happened to be the president of the Jordanian University in Amman. And he says, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of your father." So sure enough, Dad underwent his procedure, healed up quickly. We had interactions with that same doctor. His name was Dr. Alamad, and really a competent and kind doctor. Interestingly, a year later, I was able to visit with Khalil, Dr. Alamad's uncle, at Jordan University, and thank him for sending his nephew to the States to learn cardiac care so he could be used to bring care and healing to my father.
That's such an amazing story. When I first heard it, and again, like I say, emotions rise up in me when I hear the story. It's that I'm sure he's eaten that strawberry growing up or somewhere, and then he comes here, and it's such a connected world. The power of relationships again, and how we all connected in this world. And again, the connectedness in the world is so a theme that we learn from agriculture, right? We are part of the soil, and we're part of everything, and this is who we are. And having that empathy and looking at things from everybody's perspective. Again, looking at United Ag and what we do from a healthcare standpoint, I always say, let's start off from the empathy standpoint, right? And sometimes people, when I first started as a CEO, people used to laugh at me and say, "Oh, what is this lady with an accent talking about? This is like a fluff thing." And I was a CFO before a CEO, so I know I'm paying attention to numbers. And so this does have an impact on success and business and growth. And it's really on both ends from a business standpoint, a learning thing.
Well said, Kirti. I think, in business, in agricultural business, it is truly an integrated approach, making sure we are engaged with the right science, attentive to all of the necessary disciplines to produce a healthy and abundant crop in the nurseries so we can provide healthy plants to growers around the world, coming alongside them, helping them realize the potential of the varieties in their field, and sharing in the fruits of that. It requires an attentiveness to the numbers. If we can't demonstrate a profit at the end of the year, we don't get to keep doing this. I'm often reminded, one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is, in business we encounter challenges, problems. The last year and a half has presented maybe more unique challenges for individuals and families and businesses with COVID. But it's interesting, many times when we encounter a problem, our first response is resistance or maybe denial. But it's interesting in business, as we solve problems and bring meaningful solutions to those whom we serve, what are we rewarded with? more problems.
Yeah.
To the degree that we solve problems, people look to us to solve the next set of problems. If we treat people well, we draw a community of diverse giftings, and through collaboration and partnerships, we can accomplish things that will far exceed what any one of us might be able to do on our own.
When you think agriculture, and when we were earlier talking about sometimes people where I live or in Northern California, the assumption is farmers market or whatever, the work that happens within agriculture. And then you hear the Human Genome Project and how that's used, and you hear gene editing, and you hear augmented intelligence and how that gets used. It kind of reminds me of the healthcare industry that we work in, and the things that happen and the innovative things that happen. And that was kind of, for me, a learning, something that I learned. And I said, even for the younger group that's coming in, right, the innovators and the scientists and the thinkers, this is an industry, there's so much potential and so many things that we can do. And that's really exciting to hear that when you were talking about that earlier.
I agree with you, Kirti. Agriculture is a fascinating industry with so many different disciplines that invite so many different types of people with diverse training and backgrounds. If you can think of a given discipline, scientific discipline, there's probably an application in agriculture, whether they are horticulturists, plant pathologists, entomologists, engineers, robotics specialists, software specialists. There is an application in production agriculture.
That's true. And then going back to what you're talking about from a partners, right? And one of the things that you had mentioned at that time, what was a story around the partnership and the relationships and how you build that. Because as you said, you can't just create it. One person or one company cannot create it. You need kind of the whole partnerships and the relationships associated with that. Is there anything that comes to mind that you're passionate about, or you would want our listeners to hear?
At the end of the day, agriculture, like most industries, is a people business. It's one of the reasons that it's so imperative that we think long term, both about our businesses and the relationships we develop over time. When I think of production agriculture and the many, many people that labor in the fields to bring the crop in, I have a deep respect for the people who work hard in the fields to bring in the harvest. The American consumer has a little concept of the diligent, consistent, reliable effort that it takes to bring in the production. It's challenging, more and more challenging, to identify the labor required to produce and bring in the crops that we do. Here at Plant Sciences, we got involved with the H-2A labor program, which is a visa program administered by the Department of Labor. And we started with just a handful of H-2A visa laborers from Mexico, Central Mexico, 7-8 years ago. This year, we expect to bring in about 210 H-2A visa holders. And part of our motivation is we farm in pretty remote areas. So if it's difficult to get labor here on the central coast of California, it's almost impossible to get labor up near the Oregon border where we farm nurseries. So we've had to invest in housing and infrastructure in order to support that effort. But, when I think of agriculture, I think of how vital each person is in the chain, from the world-class scientists to the labor, from the labor to the world-class scientists. And it's truly a community. And without each component, the system breaks down.
Yeah. And then the other misconception sometimes people have is the industry and the empathy they have towards everybody who's involved in here, right? Even from a United Ag and providing health insurance, ag industry provided health insurance before it was mandated to do so. It was not somebody saying, oh, you have to do this for the employees, but it was provided for the employees. And there is the whole scholarship and educational scholarships and the way the employees are taken care of in agriculture. when I hear that and when I hear stories of that, it's amazing that people don't know. I mean, this is ag, right? This is how people get treated in ag, which is you would want to work somewhere, an industry that's treated that way, that you feel that warm hug for family or empathy that comes in.
Yeah, I can illustrate that even with our H-2A labor force. We have about a 98% return year over year of the people who've been with us the year before want to return because they feel properly respected through the housing, through the manager training, through the way they're treated. And, I had a young man come to me a couple seasons ago during the middle of harvest in October. He said, "Hey, my wife is having a baby and there's some complications." I said, "No problem, we'll get you there." So that's one of the benefits of the H-2A program, having visas they can come and go. My son Jeff drove this individual from McDowell to the Sacramento airport that night. He caught a flight into Guadalajara. He was there for the birth of his child, and he was back in the field 3 days later. So that's the type of respect that if we can figure out how to solve some of these obvious challenges and do it in a respectful manner, everybody benefits.
You said, even looking at the founding from Richard, where he started and what you lead with, it's being true to who you are, being true to your value system, but being flexible with your methods, right? That's something that stayed with me because that gave me, I introspected on that on my flight back, and I kind of felt, do I do this at UnitAg, right? So some of the things that you mentioned, and as all of us, when we listen in to other people and we do that, we want to have a takeaways where you're reflecting on your own leadership and the way you lead your companies. Is there something that I need to tweak or change and think a little different? So that made me think a little bit differently. Is there something you want to talk about?
Like you, somebody shared that with me at some point, and it really resonated with me. I think as organizations, we tend to get stuck in our methods. And by default, we often water down our values in an effort to remain relevant, when in reality, the inverse is a much more powerful statement. If we can hold fast to our values, not lose sight of who we are, what we're called to do, what is our mission, how are we, who are we called to be, and how are we going to accomplish that, and remain flexible with our methods, I think that's a very potent combination. It reminds me of, I think it was General Schwarzkopf during the first Desert Storm. He spoke about character and competence. He said, a winning soldier, a leader in the military, he said, I'm always looking for character and competence. He says, but if I must do without one, I'll select character. Character is holding fast to our values. And I think we can demonstrate competence by being flexible with our methods. Take our learnings, take our experience, take the input of others, and don't be afraid to try new things. I think I commend you, Kirti. Here you are, the president of UABT with a background as a CFO, and here you are doing a podcast. I would say that's not afraid to try new things. And I think in order to remain relevant in business and to be able to offer meaningful solutions, we've got to listen to our customers. What are their pain points? What are their needs? And if we can adapt and deliver solutions to real issues, we will always have a place in the marketplace.
That is so true. And one of the things that I kind of also, the last 2 or 3 years have been difficult because of all the changes that are coming up. And as you lead organizations to change, you want to change and you want to be the new people coming in, technologies coming in, be open to that, but at the same time, be true to who you are and your character and your values. That's a very hard thing to do. It's sometimes easier said than done because sometimes you fall back and you start questioning the value system. And that is not a good thing because then all falls apart, right? It's if you're building something, the foundation is gone and then everything crumbles. And I see that happen around me. And like you said earlier, I read and introspect a lot of things where what are the things that kind of learning from the other companies that you do. I mean, that happens all the time. And especially in companies like United Ag or Plant Sciences with founder-led and started, and then you have new people with new ideas and new technologies coming in. Sometimes you start doubting yourself. But that's being true to the value system is something I learned in the last couple of years being at United Ag.
It's good, Kirti. And we are the beneficiaries of that. When I reflect on the service through the products, it matters. The world of healthcare and insurance is a complex world, not different than agriculture and ag tech. When you and your people are available, leading with empathy, listening, helping to solve problems, I see UABT growing not only in its influence, but its platform, and being able to deliver more services to more people in need of such services. And I think what you're doing and what we're attempting to do here are not too different.
That's the reason, I guess, though, Magic was created that day, because very much aligned to the way you think, the way we do things at United Ag. And again, relationships, empathy, but again, being true to your financials, because if you cannot sustain financially, then that all falls apart too, right? How do you make sure it works in numbers at the same time you do right by people and build the relationships and bring innovation, bring technology? That's my passion. We have the Health Innovation Forum. We bring in technology, and similar to what you're doing from the other partnerships that you have. So this has been exciting. Is there anything that I missed that you would want to share?
I'm very grateful to be a part of agriculture, grateful for the people that we've had the opportunity to meet, including yourself.
Thank you.
On the journey, and looking forward to being able to expand that and continue to do the work that we're passionate about. Thank you.
And same here, because I felt when I left your presence that day, I always say it's not what you get out of a meeting, but the way you feel after you meet somebody, right? So to feel inspired, to feel energetic, to go back and do the things was amazing, and that speaks for it. And part of the idea of the podcast was very similar to connecting with more people in agriculture and getting these stories out. Thank you for making this happen. You're the reason This Is Ag happened. So thank you so much for doing that.
You're very welcome. You're going to have fun with this. There's a lot of wonderful people doing wonderful work that you can bring to an audience.
Thank you.